Millionaire marries ugly maid for revenge, but he didn't expect to discover her big secret. The Montero mansion was plunged into the silence of the night. The only sound came from the clink of ice spinning in the glass of whiskey that Ricardo held tightly. He was sitting in his dark leather armchair in the elegantly decorated office, but his mind was far from there. His eyes stared into space, filled with resentment. Isabella's betrayal was an open wound, throbbing in his soul. He swirled the glass slowly, watching the amber liquid reflect the light from the lamp. His voice echoed in the lonely room. I was an idiot. He raised the glass to his mouth and took a long sip. The heat of the whiskey burned down his throat, but nothing was more bitter than the taste of disappointment. He trusted Isabella. He planned a future with her. And now all that was left was the memory of her fake smile and the knowing laugh of Santiago, his best friend, or at least the one he pretended to be. His fist clenched on the mahogany desk. His jaw was tense, the muscles rigid from holding back the fury that was building inside him. Do they think they can ridicule me? That I'm a rich fool, easy to fool and discard? His voice sounded low, but full of venom. Ricardo Montero was no ordinary man. He built his empire from scratch, learned to master the game of business, and became one of the most influential entrepreneurs in the country. He had always been a strategist, always knowing when to attack and when to retreat. But this time, there would be no retreat. Isabella and Santiago thought they had won, but he still held the cards. He stood up abruptly and walked to the panoramic window of the office. The city shone under the starry night, indifferent to the hatred that was growing inside him. He took a deep breath. He knew exactly how to make Isabella pay. A cold, calculating smile played across his lips. If Isabella valued status, power, and sophistication, then he would destroy all of that for her. But not in the obvious way. He would not stoop to her level with public arguments or arguments. He would use intelligence. He would plan every step. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. The call was answered on the third ring. Mr. Montero? The deep, respectful voice of Gonzalez, his faithful butler, sounded on the other end of the line. I need you now, Gonzalez. I am at your disposal, sir. What do you require? I have a job for you, and I want it done to perfection. There was a brief pause before he answered. As you wish, sir. Ricardo hung up, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Isabella thought she had won, but the game was only just beginning. The clock was just past midnight when Gonzalez entered Ricardo Montero's office. The butler, a middle-aged man with impeccable posture and a shrewd gaze, knew that his boss only called him at this hour when something very serious was at stake. He closed the door behind him and waited, unhurriedly, until Ricardo, still with his back to him, broke the silence. You have served me for years, Gonzalez. You have always been discreet, efficient, and loyal. Gonzalez inclined his head in a respectful gesture. I have only done what I consider to be right, Mr. Montero. Ricardo finally turned around, his eyes carrying a mixture of coldness and determination. He took a cigar from inside the drawer and lit it slowly, unhurriedly, before continuing. You must have heard the rumors. You must have seen the looks. You must have heard the whispers in the hallways. The butler remained impassive. About Miss Isabella? He asked, his voice calm. Ricardo laughed, but there was no humor in his laughter, only contempt. Miss Isabella. How ironic. That woman is nothing but a traitor. She humiliated me, Gonzalez, in front of all those hypocritical people from high society. She went to bed with that worm, Santiago. He threw the cigar into the ashtray with force, as if the object represented Santiago himself. His chest rose and fell rapidly, the fury still alive in his veins. Gonzalez, however, remained calm. He knew that this was no ordinary outburst. Ricardo Montero never spoke without purpose. He was about to make a plan. "And what do you intend to do, sir?" asked the butler, maintaining his composure. Ricardo leaned forward across the table, his fingers drumming on the polished mahogany. "If Isabella wants so much status, I'll take it away from her. If she wants to be admired, I'll make her be ridiculed. And I'll do it in front of the very people she's worked so hard to impress." Gonzalez arched an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to do that, sir?" The businessman smiled, and this time it was a cruel smile. "I'm going to get married, Gonzalez." The butler blinked in surprise. "Get married, sir?" "Yes, but not just anyone." Ricardo sat back down, crossing his fingers in front of his face. "I'm going to choose someone who will make Isabella writhe in rage. Someone with no status, no beauty, no refinement. Someone who will make the entire society wonder what the hell I'm doing. I want everyone to be shocked. I want Isabella to drown in her own poison." Gonzalez didn't react, but inside he was analyzing the audacity of the plan. "So, you want a peculiar wife?" Ricardo nodded. "Exactly. And you, Gonzalez, will help me find her." The butler inclined his head slightly. "Very well, sir. As always, I will handle everything with the utmost discretion." Ricardo picked up his glass of whiskey again and took a slow sip. "Good, because this will be the ultimate humiliation." The next morning, Ricardo Montero woke up with even greater determination. He dressed with the precision of always, his impeccable posture reflecting the absolute control he had always exercised over his life, except perhaps over what he felt for Isabella. But that would end now. As he descended the marble stairs of his mansion, he found Gonzalez waiting for him in the main hall. The butler, as usual, kept a neutral expression, but Ricardo knew he was curious to hear more details about the plan. Ricardo poured himself a strong coffee, took a sip, and then, bluntly, announced, "I've made my decision, Gonzalez. I'm getting married." The butler remained impassive, but asked naturally, "And do you already have someone in mind, sir?" Ricardo let out a short laugh, the sound heavy with irony. "Not exactly, but I know exactly the type of woman I'm looking for." He walked to the window, looking out over the vast gardens of his estate. The morning sunlight bathed the landscape, but his mind was plunged in the darkness of his revenge. "I want you to find a woman without connections, someone who has never been mentioned in the society columns, without an influential family, without formal education, without any beauty that attracts attention." Gonzalez blinked in surprise. For a moment, he thought he had heard wrong. "Excuse me, sir, but not pretty?" Ricardo turned and smiled coldly. "Exactly. I want someone who will make society widen its eyes and question my sanity. Someone who will cause indignation. If Isabella thought she could humiliate me, I want her to feel firsthand what it's like to be despised by everyone. I want my choice to consume her with hatred." Gonzalez remained silent for a moment. He had witnessed many of his boss's plans, but this one was particularly bold. "I see, sir. So, should I look among the maids?" Ricardo nodded. "Exactly. It must be someone completely disposable to these snobbish people. A woman no one would ever imagine by my side. That will be my perfect move." The butler adjusted his tie and bowed his head slightly. "Very well, Mr. Montero. I know exactly where to start." Ricardo smiled and took another sip of coffee, tasting the bitterness in his mouth. With luck, he would soon make Isabella taste something even more bitter, the taste of her own ruin. That night, Isabella showed up unexpectedly at the Montero mansion. She was dressed in an elegant blue silk dress, her hair impeccably styled, and her expensive perfume filled the air around her. Her eyes were troubled, but her posture was firm. She was not a woman to humiliate herself, but she knew she needed to talk to Ricardo. Gonzalez hesitantly announced his presence. Ricardo, who was reading a report in his office, looked up and took a deep breath. "Let her in," he said, his tone indifferent. Isabella walked in with measured steps, her heels echoing on the marble floor. "Ricardo," she began, her voice soft, almost pleading. "We need to talk." He closed the folder slowly and leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms. "I don't see what else there is to say, Isabella. You've made your choice." She stepped closer to the table, her hands resting on the polished surface. "You need to listen to me. Things are not as they seem." Ricardo let out a dry laugh. "Oh, no? Then tell me, Isabella, was what I saw a delusion? My best friend in your bed, was it all a trick of my imagination?" She bit her lip, looking away for a moment. "I made a mistake, but it was a moment of weakness, Ricardo. I never stopped loving you." That sentence made his blood boil. He stood up, resting his hands on the table, looking directly at her. "You never stopped loving me?" Her voice was full of sarcasm. "And yet you threw yourself into Santiago's arms? You ridiculed me, Isabella? To think that a few sweet words will change, that is pure naivety on your part?" She took a step back, feeling the weight of his fury. "I was foolish. I was pressured. I was confused. Santiago took advantage of the moment. Enough!" Ricardo interrupted, his patience exhausted. "I don't care to hear your excuses. And to be honest, you did me a favor." Isabella frowned. "A favor?" He smiled, cold and merciless. "Yes, you showed me that love is a weakness. And now, I'm about to give the world a show it will never forget." She narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "What do you mean by that?" Ricardo picked up a glass of whiskey from the table and took a sip, studying her with a calculating gaze. "Soon, Isabella, everyone will know. But I can guarantee you one thing." He walked over to her and leaned in slightly, his voice low and sharp. "You're going to regret this, and I'm going to watch every second of it." Her heart raced. She knew Ricardo well enough to know that he never made empty threats. "Ricardo, please." She tried one last time, her voice cracking. He pulled away, turning his back to her. "Good night, Isabella, and make the most of what's left of your reputation." Gonzalez appeared in the doorway, ready to escort her out. Isabella felt despair tighten in her chest, but she knew there was no point in insisting. When the door closed behind her, Ricardo smiled to himself. Isabella had tried to make things right, but it was too late. He already had a new plan, and this one would be much more destructive. The next morning, Ricardo was up before sunrise. He paced back and forth in his office, a cup of strong coffee in his hands, while Gonzalez, his faithful butler, stood before him, awaiting orders. "I need you to find a woman," Ricardo declared, looking at Gonzalez with a sharp gaze. The butler arched an eyebrow. "A woman, sir?" Ricardo nodded and took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "But not just any woman, Gonzalez. I want someone with no family connections, no formal education, and, if possible, unattractive." Gonzalez blinked a few times, stunned by the request. "Unattractive, sir?" he repeated, trying to understand. Ricardo laughed. a low sound full of irony. Exactly. Someone who would never be accepted in high society circles. I want everyone to be horrified when they see me with her. I want Isabella and Santiago to gasp in shock when they find out that I chose this woman to be my wife. The butler scratched his head uncomfortably. Forgive my frankness, sir, but this plan doesn't seem the most sensible to me. Ricardo approached, resting a hand on the butler's shoulder, his expression implacable. Gonzalez, you have served me for years and seen firsthand what Isabella did to me. You know how much this betrayal cost me. The butler sighed and nodded. If that is your wish, sir, I will do as you ask. Ricardo smiled with satisfaction. Great. Search among the servants in the city, in the orphanages, wherever necessary. I want someone who fits the profile, and quickly. Gonzalez bowed his head respectfully before leaving the office. Ricardo leaned back in his chair and smiled to himself. The first step of his revenge plan was underway. Isabella had betrayed him, and now he would humiliate all those who had once doubted him. That same afternoon, Gonzalez returned to the Montero mansion with a serious expression. He entered the office where Ricardo was waiting for him impatiently, drumming his fingers on the mahogany desk. "Have you found anyone?" Ricardo asked bluntly. The butler nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Her name is Maria. She works as a servant in the Valenzuela family's house." Ricardo narrowed his eyes. "And does she fit the profile I asked for?" Gonzalez cleared his throat before continuing. "For the most part, yes. Maria has no known family, was raised in an orphanage, and received no formal education. From what I understand, she never attended prestigious schools or had any kind of influence. The Valenzuelas hired her out of pity, but they only keep her for the most menial jobs, and, well, her looks don't stand out." Ricardo smirked, satisfied. "She looks perfect." Gonzalez hesitated for a moment, frowning. "There's something about her, sir. Something I can't quite put my finger on. The servants at the Valenzuela house say she's reserved, almost invisible. She never causes trouble, but she also never gets close to anyone. It's as if she prefers to be ignored." Ricardo chuckled softly. "Even better, a woman who's quiet and unpretentious. She won't question anything, just accept the opportunity I'll give her." The butler took a deep breath before asking, "Do you want me to arrange the meeting?" Ricardo stood up and straightened his jacket. "Number, I want to see this Maria with my own eyes." And with that, he left the office, determined to meet the woman who would be part of his plan. The sun was beginning to set behind the hills when Maria arrived at the Montero mansion. She was wearing a simple, worn uniform, her hands nervously clutching the strap of her bag as her gaze roamed the large property in front of her. It was all so new, so big, and yet so intimidating. She couldn't help but feel nervous. She wasn't used to this kind of environment. The Montero mansion was the kind of place that seemed to belong only to the richest and most powerful. "Come in, Maria," Gonzalez said, opening the front door for her. "The house is yours now. Señor Ricardo will give you further instructions shortly." She took a hesitant step inside, her gaze fixed on the luxurious details of the entrance. The imposing staircase, the paintings on the walls, the gleam of the marble beneath her feet. She had never imagined that one day she would step foot in a house like this. In the days that followed, Ricardo observed her from a distance, carefully. He was never one to show himself, but he was always nearby, as if circumstances brought him into view without anyone noticing. In the hallways, he would pass by casually, always glancing at Maria, as if he were making sure she was doing her job. "She's just a servant," he told himself, although it was clear that something about her intrigued him. Her simple but dignified posture did not go unnoticed, and her discreet demeanor made him increasingly curious. What was she really? Rumors began to spread through the halls of the mansion. The other maids whispered among themselves whenever Maria's name was mentioned. They didn't know what to think of the woman who seemed so out of place, but who at the same time had something mysterious in her eyes. One day, while Maria was in the garden, arranging some flowers, Ricardo suddenly appeared. He approached with firm but unhurried steps, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maria looked at him in surprise, but said nothing, continuing her work in silence. "You seem comfortable here," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of curiosity. She looked up quickly, a little uncomfortable. "I'm just doing my duty, sir," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. Ricardo gave her a subtle smile. "Yes, of course." He paused, studying her for a moment. "You know that high society loves a good scandal, don't you?" Maria frowned in confusion. "I don't know what you mean by that, sir," she replied. Ricardo leaned a little closer to her, as if he were making a revelation. "I'm thinking of inviting you to dinner. Something discreet. But that will cause a little surprise." Maria looked at him, not knowing how to respond. She had no idea what he really wanted, but something in the tone of his voice sent a chill down her spine. He continued, "Imagine the reaction of the others. They will certainly be curious to see someone like you by my side." She felt a growing tension in the air, but at the same time, a part of her felt attracted to the idea. After all, who has never dreamed of seeing their enemies surprised, right? However, she was no fool. She knew that this was all part of a game. But perhaps this was the moment to show everyone that she was not a simple servant. "I accept, sir," she said, her voice firm, though her heart was beating faster. The dinner took place a few days later, at one of the city's most elegant restaurants. The guests, a mix of important figures from high society, watched in amazement as Ricardo entered the room with Maria at his side. She was dressed in a simple but surprisingly good-quality dress, something he had provided for her. But it was her gaze, now more confident, that caught their attention. She no longer looked like an ordinary servant. Something about her posture, her quiet confidence, was beginning to intrigue those present. As eyes began to turn to them, whispers began to spread throughout the room. Some people could not believe their eyes. How could Ricardo Montero, one of the richest men in the city, be so comfortable with someone so out of place? They exchanged glances, whispered, but no one dared interrupt. Ricardo seemed to be enjoying the situation, as if he had planned every detail of that moment. He sat down at the table with the same calm, but with a smile that showed he knew he had just caused a stir. Maria, for her part, maintained her posture. Although she felt the eyes on her, she did not waver. "Are you comfortable here?" Ricardo asked, looking at her, a glint of amusement in his eyes. Maria gave him a slight smile, challenging him without words. "Yes, I am. It seems that high society loves a good scandal." He smiled back, satisfied. The night was just beginning, and he knew this was the first step in his revenge. With every movement, every gesture, the rumors grew, and his plan began to take shape. But the most surprising thing was yet to come. The night continued to unfold in a tense and intriguing way. The restaurant room was filled with murmurs and curious glances. Everyone watched Ricardo Montero and Maria, the unlikely figure at his table, as if they were both pieces of a baffling puzzle. As dinner continued, the air was filled with anticipation. as if everyone knew something big was about to happen. Ricardo, sitting imposingly, was still enjoying the surprise he had caused. He cast quick glances at Maria, who was trying not to show her own uneasiness, although she knew that every word he uttered there carried a weight that no one could ignore. The waiter brought a bottle of expensive wine and served them, his movements precise and discreet. Ricardo took the glass and looked at Maria with a subtle smile. "You've done very well, Maria," he said, his voice soft but filled with deep meaning. "I'm beginning to believe you have what it takes to handle what's coming." Maria raised her glass, not really knowing how to respond. Her gaze met Ricardo's, and for a moment she felt there was something more behind those words. But what was it? Before she could formulate a response, Ricardo leaned forward a little, his eyes fixed on hers, now more intense than ever. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to say something that would change everything. The tension at the table rose, and the conversations around it quieted, as everyone realized something important was about to be revealed. "Maria," he began, his voice now serious, no joking. "I know you must be wondering what's going on. I know this is all unexpected, but the truth is, you have something that none of the others here have." He paused, scanning the faces around the table who were attentive to the conversation. "You surprised me, and I like to be surprised." Maria looked at him, not knowing what to say. She could feel her heart beating faster. What did he want from her? Why all this attention, all this game? Ricardo stood up from the table and all eyes focused on him. He approached her so unexpectedly that Maria tensed, not knowing whether to move away or stay there, waiting for what would come. He crouched down in front of her chair, looking straight into her eyes. The murmur of the room was now a distant sound, drowned out by the intensity of the moment. "Maria," he said, with a smile that seemed to be a mixture of irony and sincerity, "I propose to you something that you would never have imagined. A marriage. Yes, you heard right." Those words fell upon her like a blow. Maria froze. His stomach was in knots, and his mind couldn't process what was happening. Marriage? How could he? "But, Mr. Richard," she began, surprise evident in her voice. I don't understand." Ricardo raised his hand, asking for silence. His eyes, now more serious, shone with a mixture of determination and something she couldn't identify. "Do you remember everything we've done so far? How we were able to cause this storm? What it meant to everyone around us? There's no other way to put it." He paused, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. All eyes were fixed on the couple, waiting for the outcome of that revelation. "I choose you, Maria," he continued with a calculating smile. "I choose you to be my wife, to face together this society that despises us so much, to destroy everything that hurt me, to take revenge on those who deserve it. It will be our revenge, and you will be the final piece in this game." Maria was paralyzed. What was he saying? She looked at him in confusion and daze, trying to understand the meaning of his words. She felt the weight of what was being proposed, but she also felt a kind of growing confusion. Marry Ricardo? To him it seemed like something simple, something that was part of his plan, but to her it was a path full of risks and uncertainties. She finally found her voice, though her mind was still clouded with surprise. "But why?" She looked at him, trying to understand the true intentions behind that proposal. "Why me?" Ricardo smiled again, but this time the smile had a hint of coldness. "Because you are the key to my revenge, Maria. And more importantly, you are someone that no one, not even Isabella, can understand. You will help me show everyone what I am capable of." The murmurs in the room intensified. People exchanged glances, whispered to each other. The marriage proposal seemed to have broken any limits of what high society could expect from someone like Ricardo Montero. Maria looked around, feeling the judgmental and curious gazes on her. But deep down, something inside her flared. Maybe it was the desire to have power over her own life, or maybe it was just the game she was about to play. "I accept," she said finally, her voice low but full of determination. "I accept, Ricardo. But know that you may be fooling yourself." Ricardo stood up, satisfied with the answer. The first step of his plan was complete. He knew that night would be etched in everyone's memory. And more importantly, it would be etched in the history of what he and Maria were about to build together. And as glances continued to be exchanged around the table, one thing was clear. The game had changed, and revenge was only just beginning. The silence of the Montero mansion seemed heavier as the night wore on. Everyone had retired to their rooms, but something still hung in the air, as if the tension that Ricardo had generated with his marriage proposal was only just beginning to manifest itself in unexpected ways. Maria, after Ricardo's proposal, had discreetly retired to the room he had prepared for her. But instead of relaxing or trying to absorb what had happened that night, she was restless. Something inside her told her that the game was not as simple as it seemed. Her mind was busy trying to connect the dots and unravel the secrets that Ricardo had carefully hidden over time. He thought she was just a piece to be moved, but Maria had her own intentions. In the dead of night, when everyone was immersed in sleep, Maria quietly got up from her bed. The mansion was dark and silent, except for the soft sounds of the breeze that filtered through the open windows. With light and precise steps, she left her room, moving like a shadow through the hallways without making the slightest sound. The house, immense and full of dark rooms, seemed more like a labyrinth. But Maria knew her shortcuts now. She had already made her observations. She was ready for what would come next. She reached Ricardo's study, where he kept some of his most important documents. The door was slightly ajar, and she knew that inside that office lay the heart of his plan. As she looked at the papers and reports spread out on the table, a sense of curiosity and caution took hold of her. It wasn't just a matter of discovering Ricardo's secrets. It was a matter of understanding what he really wanted with her and how he could use her for his own ends. She wasn't a disposable piece. Maria took a small camera out of her bag, one she had carefully hidden when she arrived at the mansion. It was nothing fancy, but it was enough for what she needed. She began photographing documents, some with official seals, others with confidential notes. The words written on the papers seemed to mean more than just numbers or business strategies. There was something else, something she couldn't fully understand, but which now became a crucial key in her game with Ricardo. As she took the pictures, Maria did her best to keep quiet. She knew that any false move could ruin everything. One slip could lead to her being discovered, and everything she had been planning would be destroyed. But she also knew that she had an advantage that Ricardo had not realized. She knew her weak points. Every gesture of trust he made around her only increased her perception that he believed she was completely submissive to him. He was wrong. After capturing the images of the documents, Maria moved to the bookshelf, where there were other files and books that might contain more clues. But before she could pick up a specific book, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Her eyes widened, and her breathing quickened. She quickly hid the camera and hid behind a heavy curtain, hoping that the person passing by would not notice her. The footsteps stopped right in front of the office door, and for a moment, everything was completely silent. Maria held her breath, her heart beating in a frantic rhythm of tension, but soon the footsteps continued, and the figure moved away. She let out the breath she had been holding, and, with trembling hands, put the camera back in her bag. Adrenaline still coursed through her veins as she moved quickly to the opposite side of the office, leaving everything as it was, leaving no trace of her presence. When she finally returned to her room, Maria felt the weight of the photographed documents in her mind. She knew that she had taken the first step towards understanding the mysteries of Ricardo Montero, and that her game was just beginning. She would no longer be a piece on his board. She would be the player who decided her own moves. As she prepared for bed, the distant sounds of the house seemed more comforting. But deep inside her, there was a growing sense that, now, she was in control. Ricardo thought he had her in his hands, but she was already preparing her own trap. He didn't know it, but Maria was playing a deeper, riskier game, and the pieces were moving in her favor. Ricardo Montero, with his usual confidence, decided to take Maria to a fancy restaurant, famous among members of high society. The ambiance was the epitome of luxury. Softly sparkling crystal chandeliers, polished marble tables, and an air of exclusivity that made anyone feel superior. The place was filled with influential figures, businessmen, politicians, and celebrities, all with an aura of power that dominated the space. Maria, who until then had behaved like a simple maid, was about to defy all expectations. Ricardo watched her closely, believing that she would follow the role he had imagined for her, a submissive, uneducated woman incapable of understanding the codes of high society. He knew that his plan for revenge would once again be underway, with everyone around admiring his new wife, a servant with no relevant history. When Maria entered the restaurant, all eyes turned to her. Her entrance was soft but determined, and she was wearing a simple but tasteful dress that contrasted with her previous appearance. However, what really made an impact was not the dress, but the impeccable posture with which she walked. It was as if she was accustomed to that environment, as if she had been born to be there, among those imposing figures. Ricardo, who was sitting at the table waiting for her, smiled with satisfaction, thinking that Isabella's humiliation would be even sweeter. She's going to be a comic figure among these people, he thought, a servant sitting next to me. Everyone will laugh. But when Maria sat down, her behavior was of an elegance that few could have imagined. With graceful movements, she picked up the menu and began to read it with a concentration that caught the attention of the waiters, and even some other customers at the table. She was not lost in it all, as one might expect from a maid without formal education. On the contrary, her command of the menu and her ability to make refined choices showed an experience in sophisticated settings that contradicted any assumptions about her. When the waiter approached to take their order, Maria went above and beyond. She spoke to him in impeccable French, choosing complex and elaborate dishes with a precision that surprised even the waiter himself. Ricardo was paralyzed for a moment. He had grown accustomed to seeing her as a woman without any sophistication, but now he found himself in front of a woman who clearly understood more than he imagined. The dinner went impeccably. Maria seemed perfectly at ease among the guests who were milling about the room, and her manner of behaving, with her refined etiquette, was so natural that it seemed as if she were one of them. Ricardo began to wonder if he was beginning to deceive himself with her. This woman, who he thought was simple, in fact, seemed to be taking control of the situation almost imperceptibly. The conversation between them flowed with the naturalness of a long-standing marriage, but at a certain point, Maria diverted the focus of the conversation to something more intriguing. "Ricardo," she said, her voice soft, but with a firmness that made him look her in the eye. "Do you really think I'm here by chance? That this whole situation has no purpose? Or could it be that you, too, are playing a game that you don't fully understand?" Ricardo, disconcerted, put down the glass of wine he was about to lift and looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean by that, Maria?" He felt uneasy, as if she knew more than he was willing to reveal. Maria smiled slightly, as if she understood what was going on in his mind. "You chose me to get revenge on Isabella, right? But don't forget, Ricardo, I'm a player too. And unlike you, I know what's at stake." She watched him with piercing eyes, as if she were challenging his trust. Ricardo felt discomfort begin to grow inside him. He didn't know what this woman knew, but something told him there was more to her than he could control. She was testing the limits of what he thought he knew about her. "I don't understand what you're trying to insinuate, Maria," Ricardo replied, trying to remain calm, but his voice was shaking a little. Maria leaned forward slightly, her eyes shining with a mystery that made him even more anxious. "Don't worry, Ricardo. I'm not a complicated person. I just want to know what you really expect from me, and how far you're willing to go to achieve your own plans. The game you're playing is much bigger than you imagine." Ricardo was silent for a moment, absorbing Maria's words. She was starting to unsettle him. He didn't know if he was being challenged or if he was beginning to understand something much deeper about his new wife. Something he didn't fully comprehend yet. But whatever it was, he knew it would change everything. Dinner continued, but the tension in the air was palpable. With every word Maria uttered, Ricardo felt the growing sensation that he was dealing with someone who knew far more about him and his family than he should. And suddenly, his revenge seemed to have turned into a dangerous game, with rules he didn't yet understand. Dinner that night seemed to have been a milestone in the story Ricardo had planned for himself. In his mind, he could already visualize the scandal that would be caused by the union of a simple woman, a servant with no history whatsoever, with a man of his stature and status. He was pleased, almost proud, to see the surprise and discomfort in the eyes of everyone around him. However, there was something about Maria that still intrigued him. The way she spoke, the sharp look she gave him when she looked at him. Something wasn't right. But he chose to ignore it. After everything he had been through, nothing could destabilize him anymore. He wanted the game to continue, and he wanted it to happen now. The next morning, Ricardo woke up determined. Not only revenge, but the completion of it was within his reach. He didn't have any more time to wait. He wanted everyone to see his conquest. He wanted to see Isabella and all the others who had despised him with eyes of astonishment and horror. He knew what he had to do, and that started with a marriage proposal. He couldn't wait any longer. He summoned Maria to his house that afternoon, where they were waiting for a simple dinner, but the atmosphere was full of tension. When she arrived, Maria was greeted with the formality that was already becoming habitual. But this time, the atmosphere seemed more tense, as if something was about to happen. He was nervous, but in a different way. It was no longer about revenge, but about the confirmation of a new chapter in his life. And that chapter would have Maria as the protagonist. "Maria," he began, his voice firm, but with a slight tremor that he tried to control. "After everything you've been through, I think it's time to take the next step. You've accompanied me this far, and I see that there's no longer any room for doubt. That's why I want you to be my wife." Maria looked at him, unsurprised. Her eyes continued to reflect a serene calm, as if all of this was already part of a larger plan that she had already foreseen. "Ricardo, do you really think this is what I expect from you? A public wedding as part of a revenge?" she said softly, but with a tone that indicated that she knew more than she was revealing. She had sensed his intentions from the beginning, and now she found herself at a crossroads. But Ricardo, unaware of the danger that was approaching, just smiled. He was in control, or at least he thought he was. "Yes, that's what I want, and that's what you're going to do." He seemed to believe he had all the answers. That was when the phone rang. Ricardo answered without thinking, and the voice on the other end was that of the person he feared most. His mother, Eugenia. "Ricardo, we need to talk now. I don't like this, and you know very well what I'm talking about." Eugenia's voice was tense, and he could tell immediately that what was about to follow was going to be a difficult conversation. "About what, Mom? I don't have the patience for your criticism right now." Her response was harsh, but Eugenia didn't flinch. "Don't play dumb, Ricardo. This marriage with this Maria, what do you think you're doing?" Eugenia wasn't afraid to confront him. She was always direct, and she knew exactly how to push him. "I know what I'm doing, Mom. I'm getting revenge. Don't you understand?" Ricardo was starting to lose his patience. He was tired of being questioned, of having to explain himself. "Revenge? With this woman? Can't you see what you're doing? Don't you understand that she might have her own intentions? That you're putting your life at risk?" Eugenia was worried, and her words carried a weight that Ricardo couldn't ignore. "I don't trust her, Ricardo. You need to think again." Ricardo looked at Maria, who remained silent, but now he felt that the atmosphere had changed. He had already chosen his path, but his mother's voice made him hesitate. "What do you mean by that, Mother?" He was beginning to feel a growing discomfort, something he did not allow himself in his controlled life. "I say that you need to look at her for real, Ricardo. It cannot be just about revenge. You are playing a dangerous game. This woman may not be who you think. Maybe she is using you too." Eugenia paused. "Have you thought about the consequences of your actions? I do not want to see my son destroyed by something so foolish." The conversation with his mother was a blow to Ricardo, but he did not want to admit it. He believed that he was in control, that nothing could destroy him. He looked at Maria, who seemed calm, but now her eyes were filled with something he could not decipher. Maybe Eugenia was right, or maybe he was seeing ghosts. Either way, he could not go back. "You're wrong, Mother. I know what I'm doing. And now I'm going to marry Maria. Nothing will change that." He hung up the phone and turned to her, still trying to find some kind of reaction. Maria, with a soft smile, said only one sentence. "Ricardo, you're so right about everything, but I have my own secrets too. Be careful what you wish for." The Montero mansion was abuzz with activity. Servants were rushing about, organizing the preparations for Ricardo and Maria's wedding. Exotic flowers, elaborate dishes, and fine fabrics were being meticulously arranged, but something was out of place. There was an air of anticipation, but also of surprise, as everyone in the house, from the servants to the guests, were beginning to realize that Maria was not the simple servant they had imagined. As the grand room was decorated with silk tablecloths and crystal chandeliers, Maria moved around the house with a confidence that left everyone present disconcerted. It wasn't just her impeccable posture or elegant bearing that drew attention. It was her unexpected ability to command every area she touched. When the architect in charge of the wedding decor came in to give final instructions, Maria was there, watching intently. Ricardo, who was with her, tried to hide his discomfort, but her eyes were shining strangely. "Are you considering putting those columns here?" Maria asked calmly, pointing to the spot where the architect had suggested the marble columns be placed. "The space would be more harmonious if you moved it to the right side. It would open up the natural light during the event, and the guest's first impression would be much more impactful." The architect, surprised, looked at her with a slight nervous smile. "Well, I hadn't thought of that, Mrs. Maria, but if you think it's a good idea—" "That's an excellent idea," Maria said without hesitation. She turned to Ricardo, who was watching everything in silence. "You can trust her, Ricardo. Architecture isn't just about aesthetics. It's about how the environment conveys a feeling. What you want in your wedding is a space that is both welcoming and grand. Those columns need to be in the right position to create that effect." Ricardo couldn't hide the surprise on his face. "You know about architecture?" Maria sonrió, pero no fue una sonrisa de arrogancia. It was the smile of someone who knew there was more to her story than Ricardo could ever imagine. "Yes, Ricardo, I know. I've learned a lot about art and design over the years. When you grow up in an environment where things really matter, aesthetics and functionality become a constant study." But the surprise didn't stop there. When the head chef came in to discuss the wedding menu, Maria also showed off her unusual talent. The chef, a portly man with a thick mustache, was explaining the sophisticated dishes that would be served to the guests when Maria approached with a thoughtful expression. "I would suggest changing the main course to something lighter, like a fresh fish with a Sicilian lemon sauce. And for dessert, perhaps a dark chocolate soufflé to balance the meal," she said, as if she had done this 100 times before. "I think the wines you have chosen could be wonderful, but to accompany the main course, perhaps a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc would have the right acidity." The chef looked at her, a little bewildered, but he couldn't help but be impressed by her wisdom. "Really, Ms. Maria? A Sauvignon Blanc? I was thinking of something more robust." Maria interrupted him with a small smile, which seemed to have a hint of complicity. "Don't get me wrong, your Cabernet Franc is wonderful, but it can overwhelm the delicate flavors of the fish. A Sauvignon Blanc will open up the palate, leaving your guests with a more balanced experience." Ricardo watched everything with an expression that was a mix of confusion and growing fascination. "I didn't know you knew so much about wine and cuisine, Maria," he said, once again surprised. She looked at him, her lips quirking slightly, but without showing any overt emotion. "I like to learn, Ricardo. Knowledge is a tool, and I've always liked to use the right tools." As the menu was adjusted and the preparations progressed, the impression that Maria was not who everyone thought she was only solidified. She was not just a maid he had chosen for his revenge plan. She seemed to be much more complex, more cunning, and most of all, more prepared to deal with Ricardo Montero's world than he had ever imagined. As the sound of wine glasses clinked throughout the house and the last flower was placed on the reception table, all eyes were on her. Not only the guests, but also the servants and the Montero family themselves began to wonder. Who was Maria really? What did she want from Ricardo? And most importantly, what was she doing there? Maria, with her unexpected knowledge and refined manners, was becoming a central figure in the wedding. And Ricardo, unbeknownst to him, was falling deeper and deeper into his own trap. Months had passed since Ricardo and Maria's wedding, and the Montero mansion, which had previously been full of rumors and curious glances, now lived in a tense silence. The relationship between the couple was fraught with tension, but Ricardo sensed that there was something more at play. Maria, with her calm demeanor and sharp intelligence, had never been an ordinary wife. She had a stranglehold on the affairs of the house, and her mysterious behavior only increased Ricardo's uneasiness. One evening, after a long day of business meetings, Ricardo decided to work a little longer in the office, reviewing financial reports and important documents. He was sitting at his desk, absorbed in the content, when a striking detail in the back of the room made him stop. The corner of a misplaced file cabinet. When he approached to investigate, he noticed that the file cabinet was open, and not only was it out of place, but the papers were being moved. "This can't be," Ricardo thought, confused. The file cabinet contained confidential documents about his father's financial transactions that involved the acquisition of several Valenzuela companies, one of the Montero family's greatest rivalries. These transactions were shrouded in secrecy, far from the eyes of anyone in high society. Ricardo, feeling a mixture of anger and confusion, turned the key in the office door and walked in with a firm step. When he turned on the light, his eyes were immediately drawn to the silent figure who stood next to the desk, shuffling through the papers with extreme concentration. Maria. She was there, in her office, going through her financial documents, not a shred of concern for his presence. She slowly turned her head toward him, her clear, piercing eyes fixed on his face. "Maria," Ricardo said, his voice sharp. "What are you doing here?" She took her time to answer, simply closing the file and placing it back on the desk. "I was just reviewing some documents," she replied with an almost unsettling calm. She didn't seem embarrassed or surprised to be caught, which only added to the tension in the air. "Reviewing documents?" Ricardo repeated, the incredulity in his voice clear. "You know what these documents mean, don't you? They're related to the Montero family business, and you have access to it?" Maria looked at him with disconcerting serenity. "You should be more careful, Ricardo. What your father does isn't as transparent as you think. I'm just trying to understand." Ricardo felt a wave of anger rise up. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Maria, his wife, was investigating something so sensitive, something that even he had no complete control over. "Are you telling me that you're just trying to understand?" he asked, taking a step toward her. "These documents aren't for you, Maria. They have nothing to do with you anymore." She stood up, keeping her cool, showing no sign of fear. "I know you're suspicious, Ricardo, and, in fact, you're right to be. But I'm not the one hiding secrets. You should know that when you marry someone like me, you can expect me to have my own interests as well." Ricardo, overcome by a mixture of bewilderment and suspicion, was paralyzed for a moment. "What are you saying? What do you know that I don't? Are you trying to find out everything about my father? Or are you just trying to get revenge for something you don't understand?" Maria gave her an enigmatic smile, a smile that made Ricardo's blood boil. "I know there's more to these transactions than you think, Ricardo. Your father isn't as innocent as you think. Maybe you should ask yourself why he never told you the truth. I'm just doing what you didn't have the courage to do. Investigate." Maria's words echoed in Ricardo's head like a punch to the stomach. He never imagined that beneath that simple servant facade, his wife would be able to understand so deeply the secrets he was trying to hide. And, what's more, she seemed to have her own intentions that he still didn't fully understand. "Are you telling me that I'm involved in something I don't even know about? That my father is involved in something bigger that I don't even realize?" Ricardo asked, anger and fear now mixed in his voice. Maria looked at him with a cold expression, but at the same time, there was a hint of respect for him. "You need to start asking the right questions, Ricardo. I'm not the one in the shadows. You are." Those words were engraved in Ricardo's mind. He had always been in control. He always thought that the reins of the situation were in his hands. But now, he was beginning to realize that Maria was much more than he imagined, and that his own certainties were beginning to crumble in the face of something much deeper and more mysterious. Before he could answer, she slowly walked away, leaving him alone, surrounded by secret documents that he never imagined would be within reach of someone so close. Distrust, like a shadow, began to spread over Ricardo's mind. He knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same again, including details about her father's first wife. ChatGPT said, "Night was falling over the Montero mansion, and the atmosphere inside the estate was tense." Ricardo, restless after his recent discoveries about Maria, called Gonzalez to his office. The butler, always discreet and efficient, was bringing information that could change everything. "Sir," Gonzalez began, keeping his tone formal but charged with urgency, "I did a deeper investigation into Maria's references and discovered that they are false." Ricardo looked up, clenching his jaw. "False? Explain yourself." Gonzalez took a deep breath before continuing. "She never worked for the families she claimed. The references she presented are made up. No one in the circles she mentioned remembers a maid named Maria." Ricardo felt a mixture of anger and unease grow inside him. Maria always demonstrated a knowledge that went far beyond what was expected of someone in her position. Now, the truth was beginning to emerge. "That means she lied to get into my house," he muttered, more to himself than to Gonzalez. Determined to get answers, Ricardo organized a dinner with members of the families where Maria claimed to have worked. If she was lying, she would be unmasked in front of everyone. That evening, the dining room of the Montero mansion was filled with important guests. Among them, members of the influential families that Maria had mentioned in the past. The conversation flowed naturally until Ricardo, with a cold and calculating look, stood up. "Maria," he said, raising his wine glass before looking at her directly, "you always mentioned your time of service to respectable families. Today we have some of your former employers here. Perhaps this is the perfect time to reminisce about the past." Maria, seated elegantly at the table, raised her eyebrows slightly, but showed no surprise. On the contrary, an enigmatic smile played on her lips. "Of course, Ricardo," she replied softly. "I'd love to reminisce about the old days." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. One of the guests, Mr. Lacerda, cleared his throat. "Well, I don't recall ever employing a Maria, I confess." "Neither do I," Mrs. Valdivia added, frowning. It was then that Maria leaned forward slightly and began to speak. "Ah, Mrs. Valdivia," she said in an almost affectionate tone. "I understand the confusion. After all, when I worked in your house, you had a peculiar habit of hiding your jewelry inside the books in the library, especially the third volume of that collection of Spanish short stories. You were afraid that your maids would discover your secret safe, weren't you?" Mrs. Valdivia paled. The murmur around the table grew louder. "Mr. Lacerda," Maria continued, turning to him, "your wife always demanded that tea be served in a specific blue cup. A gift from her late mother. And when a new maid served it in a different cup, she was dismissed the next day." Mr. Lacerda's eyes widened. How do you know that?" There was absolute silence in the room. Ricardo was watching everything intently. How could she know so many intimate details? Maria kept her gaze calm and steady. "Perhaps my memory is better than yours," she said simply. The guests exchanged glances, visibly disconcerted. No one dared question her again. Later that evening, Ricardo confronted Maria in her office. The usual coldness in his gaze now gave way to something else, an urgent need for answers. "Who the hell are you, Maria?" he asked, approaching her. "You fooled everyone, but I won't stand for it. You know too much. And not just about these families. You know things about the Monteros that even I don't know, don't you?" Maria tilted her head, watching him with an intriguing glint in her eyes. "The truth can be a burden, Ricardo," she said softly. "But you've begun to realize that your family isn't as spotless as it seems, haven't you?" He narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Maria took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Your father had a first wife," she revealed, "a woman who was erased from the Montero family's history. And if you knew what happened to her, you'd understand that your family's secrets are much darker than you imagine." Ricardo felt a shiver run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" He was about to lose his temper. Maria sonrió ligeramente. "Maybe it's time for you to start looking for the truth, Ricardo. Or are you going to continue living in the illusion your father created for you?" She left the office, leaving Ricardo alone, immersed in a flood of doubts and revelations that could change everything. The next morning brought more than just sunlight over the Montero mansion. It also brought a new mystery to haunt Ricardo. Sitting in his office, he was reviewing financial documents when he noticed something strange. Papers that should have been there, important documents about the acquisition of the Valenzuela companies, had simply disappeared. Ricardo frowned. He clearly remembered putting those contracts in a locked drawer. Who could have taken them? His gaze hardened as he thought of the one person who had been hanging around the office too much lately. Maria. "It can't be a coincidence," he muttered to himself, clenching his fists on the table. Determined to get answers, he decided to step up his surveillance. However, that night, a social event at the city's most exclusive club required his presence. He couldn't arouse suspicion, so he would continue with his schedule as usual, but he would keep Maria under observation. The event hall at the Royal Club was packed. Businessmen, politicians, and socialites toasted each other with laughter and greetings. Ricardo walked among the guests, fulfilling his role as host, until a familiar voice caught his attention. "Montero, it's been a while." Ricardo turned around and found Fernando Valencia, an old business partner of his father. The man was in his 60s, but he still had the firm posture and sharp eyes of someone who had faced many difficult deals. "Fernando," Ricardo greeted, shaking the veteran's hand. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Old friends never really disappear, do they?" Valencia smiled, but his expression soon changed. He was staring at something, or, rather, someone. Ricardo followed the man's gaze and found Maria on the other side of the room. She was wearing an elegant dress and chatting politely with some ladies of high society. But what caught Ricardo's attention was Fernando's reaction. The man looked pale, as if he had seen a ghost. "Fernando? What is it?" It took the man a moment to regain his voice, but when he spoke, his question was almost a whisper. "Who? Who is this woman?" Ricardo narrowed his eyes. "My wife, Maria." Fernando shook his head, stunned. That can't be." "What are you talking about?" Ricardo asked, his patience wearing thin. The old businessman turned to face him with a grim expression. "She looks exactly like someone I knew many years ago. Your father's first wife." Ricardo felt a chill run down his spine. "That's impossible," he said, trying to maintain his composure. Fernando took a deep breath. "Perhaps you should reconsider, Montero. Because if she is who I think she is, then there are secrets in your family that you never imagined." Ricardo's head was spinning. Missing documents, secrets from the past, and now this. Who was Maria really? And what did she want? He had to find out before it was too late. The transformation was sudden and undeniable. The name Maria, once spoken with indifference or curiosity, now echoed with authority through the halls of the Montero mansion. She was no longer just Ricardo's wife. Now she was in charge. Servants who had once followed Gonzalez's orders now bowed to her presence, fulfilling her demands without question. She reviewed accounts, inspected the wine cellar, and made changes to the kitchen suppliers. "This silverware is out of date," Maria decreed one morning, holding up a gleaming set of silverware. "Order a new set, something worthy of our family." The servants exchanged glances. "Our family?" Gonzalez watched from afar, uneasily. Maria not only knew how to run the mansion, but she also seemed to know it intimately, as if she had grown up there. Ricardo watched it all with a clenched jaw. He didn't like the idea of losing control of his own home. Montero Island had always been the family's private retreat, a place where only the Monteros and their most select guests had access. It was a symbol of exclusivity, power, and tradition. When Maria suggested they go there, Ricardo agreed, hoping the isolation would help him finally understand her true intentions. But the surprise came before they even arrived. "Avoid the main entrance," Maria ordered the boat's pilot. "We'll dock in the South Cove, near the old pier." Ricardo frowned. "How do you know about the South Cove? Not even many members of my family know there's another entrance." Maria just smiled. "There are many things about the Monteros that you still don't know, Ricardo." When they disembarked, she walked around the property as if she had been there before. She touched the ancient stone of the wall, murmured something about Spanish architecture, and pointed to a hidden spot among the trees. "That path leads to the old hunting lodge," she said. "That's where your father met with his associates in the 1970s. Ricardo narrowed his eyes. "Have you studied every detail of my family? Or have you lived this story?" Maria stopped, turned to him, and with a calmness that sent chills down his spine, she said, "I am the story of your family." That night, in the flickering light of the main living room of the island house, Maria finally revealed the truth. "My full name is Maria Valencia Montero," she began, crossing her legs elegantly. "I am the daughter of Elena Valencia, your father's first wife." Ricardo felt the air rush out of his lungs. "What?" "My mother was ripped from this family. My grandfather, Fernando Valencia, was betrayed by your father, Antonio Montero, and lost all of the Valenzuela companies. I have spent the last 20 years planning my revenge. And now, Ricardo." She leaned closer, her eyes boring into his. "I have taken what is mine." Ricardo tried to maintain his composure, but his mind was collapsing. "You used me." "I did exactly what you tried to do to me," she snapped. "But unlike you, I succeeded. Now you have two choices. Accept me as your partner and return the Valenzuela companies to my family, or watch the Montero empire crumble before your eyes." Ricardo knew she wasn't bluffing. Maria was Elena's daughter. Her plan was perfect. Leaning against the table, he took a deep breath. For the first time in his life, Ricardo Montero was completely defeated. "So, Maria," he said, looking up, "what's the next step?" She smiled victoriously. "The next step, Ricardo? Now, we rebuild the empire. My way." The tension in the room was suffocating. Ricardo remained seated, his eyes fixed on Maria, who now occupied the chair of her father, Antonio Montero. It was the ultimate symbol of power in the family, and she had taken that seat without asking permission. "You've got me completely cornered, haven't you?" Ricardo murmured, with a bitter smile. Maria crossed her arms. assessing him coldly. This isn't about revenge, Ricardo. This is about justice. What was stolen from my mother, from my family, will now be restored. You want the Valenzuela companies back? He said, stalling for time. But what about the Montero Empire? Do you really think you can run it? Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Ricardo, I already manage. The mansion's employees answer to me. The shareholders already know that I'm the one who makes the decisions now. You've become expendable. Ricardo stood up suddenly, his face red with anger. You think you can just erase my name? Erase my family's history? Maria stared at him firmly. I don't need to erase anything. Your father did it all by himself, when he betrayed my mother and destroyed the Valenzuela family. I'm just fixing what should have been done a long time ago. He ran his hands through his hair in exasperation. What if I don't accept this deal? Maria leaned forward across the table, her eyes flashing. If you don't accept it, I'll destroy the Montero family. I have documents that could destroy this family. And you know, I'm not bluffing. Ricardo felt a lump in his throat. For the first time in his life, he was completely at a loss. Maria had beaten him. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then he looked at her. Very well, Maria. The Valenzuela companies will be returned, and you will be in charge of everything. Maria Sonrió. A wise decision. She held out her hand, and Ricardo reluctantly shook it. In that instant, he knew. The Montero Empire now belonged to Maria Valencia Montero. I'm sure this story surprised you. If so, leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell. By doing so, you won't miss our next story.